Well, good morning once again, everyone. Our lesson for today is going to be taken from 2 Samuel, chapter 6. So if you'd like to turn there, that's what we'll be learning from today. 2 Samuel chapter 6 is in the middle of what I would call the second half of David's story. He's defeated his first great enemy of Saul, who had opposed him as the original but then disgraced king of Israel. And now he is really trying to establish his own place as not only the leader of this nation and of its armies, but also as its chief worshiper of God. One of David's main concerns as he goes throughout his life is making sure that not only that he knows that he is one of God's people, but that he demonstrates it to everybody else in a way that is undeniable. As we're looking here, one of the things that we can pick up on is that David has a certain sense of pride associated with his ability to follow God. And unlike other worldly types of pride, this is almost encouraged by God. It is one of the things that he goes out of his way to congratulate David on. Even later on in the scriptures, we see where writers of the New Testament talk about David's faith to God and hold him up as an example of what that should look like in our lives as well. So as we read this chapter, let's look for the places where pride is showing up in David's life. In chapter 6 and verse 12, it says this: "Now it was told King David, saying, The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him on account of the ark of God. And David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness." So let's stop there and back up for just a second. What we are looking at here is a situation where the ark of the Lord had been captured by the Philistines and then brought back in to the country, but they were afraid of this ark. They were afraid of the presence of the Lord. And after the word got back to David that the guy whose house had been kept at was blessed, David took that as a sign that this was his time to come and get it and get some of those blessings for his own house and for his own city. And so they go and they get it. And so it was, verse 13, that when the bearers of the ark of the Lord had gone, I actually have messed up. I wanted to read you part of that story, and we need to back up just a little bit. Let's go to the beginning of this chapter and actually look at where the ark originally gets moved, and then we'll continue on from there, because I'm missing part of what I wanted to show you if I skip ahead. Now David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him to Baal-Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name, the very name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned above the cherubim. They placed the ark of God on a new cart that they had brought, that they might bring it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were leading the new cart. So they brought it with the ark of God from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, and Ahio was walking behind the ark. Meanwhile, David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with all kinds of instruments made of fir wood, with lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. But when they reached to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out to the Lord the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen nearly upset it. And the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and God struck him down there for his irreverence. And he died there because of the ark of God. David became angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. So David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" And David was unwilling to move the ark of the Lord into the city of David with him. But David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite, and thus the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. So there's the backstory in a little bit more detail. And the reason why I wanted to take the time to read that, was that we're not necessarily seeing wrong motives on the part of the people who are delivering this, right? They put it on a cart, meaning to take it and to put it into David's house, to give it a place of honor, to take care of it. But nevertheless, they followed the wrong procedures. The ark is supposed to be carried between priests and not transported on a cart at all. So naturally, when it's on a cart and you hit a big enough bump, you have to steady it. And so Ahio here puts his hand up, and Uzzah puts his hand up, and he dies. And so we have this moment where David is now angry at the Lord, and then afraid of the presence of the Lord in the form of the ark. And so it stays away. Then word comes to David, in the passage we read initially, that in fact the man who is now keeping the ark is blessed. He's not suffering any ill fortunes at all, but instead is richly blessed because of the presence of the ark. And so David goes out to collect it again. This time they do carry it properly, and the same amount of celebration than what was happening before picks up again. Remember, the earlier verses we read there, David and his whole party are out in front of the ox cart, celebrating and welcoming the Lord into the city in this procession. And so in verse 13 here, to continue from where we left off earlier, it says, "And so it was that when the bearers of the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. And David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. And so David and all the house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouting and the sound of the trumpet." Now, an ephod is sort of a very simple kind of a garment that is worn typically underneath clothing. There's a type of an ephod that's actually worn on the outside of the clothing by the priests. And you can see that in the dictation of what should be worn by the priests in the books of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers rather, I believe. But regardless here, it's just a very simple single piece of clothing. David's not wearing his full kingly garb, but instead is wearing basically one garment and what some people might even consider to be underclothes at this point. And he's going up and wearing this linen ephod, and he's participating in this celebration of the return of the ark of the Lord. Specifically, the scripture says he's dancing with all of his might. I don't think I've ever done that in my life, maybe when I was a little kid, but David is putting all of his energy into dancing and welcoming the presence of the Lord into his city. And so, what is the reaction from the people that are encountering this? What are they seeing? Are they seeing the king and his pride in welcoming the Lord into his city? Are they seeing the honor that he's giving to God in bringing the ark here and treating it with respect and honor in that way? No, the person that we hear from is David's wife, and we see Michal's reaction to this, and it starts in verse 16. "It happened as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, that Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart." So David is out here completely dedicating every ounce of energy he has into dancing before the Lord, dedicating this time to bringing the ark of the Lord into the city so he can put it in a place of honor, and Michal hates him for it. She looks at him and despises him. And it's interesting here to see where pride comes from. See, Michal's pride was that she was the daughter, she was not the son, but a daughter, of the former king. She was Saul's daughter, right? And so her pride was in her status as a dignitary, as a princess, as the daughter of the king. And she knew that she had the right to be married to David because of that status. And that she was put in that position because of something that she had been born into, something she could claim for herself. But David's pride is that the Lord has allowed him to bring the Lord's presence in the form of the ark into the city of David. David's pride is placed on honoring the Lord and making sure that God is the one who receives all of the glory in this moment. Let's go ahead and read a few more verses and see what David's response to Michal is. So they brought in the ark of the Lord, this is verse 17. They brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent which David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished the offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offering, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. Further, he distributed to all the people, to the multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread and one of dates, and one of raisins to each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house. So David not only brings in the ark of the Lord, he sets it up, he offers sacrifices himself, but then he hands out food to everybody, and he says, this is a party. We are celebrating that the Lord's presence has returned to his people. It's been placed in a place of honor among his people. So he has made sure that every person who saw him dancing in his undershirt, in front of the Ark of the Covenant, all the way into where this tent was, and setting it up, now sees him in that same garment, making sacrifices and passing out gifts to everyone to say, we're honoring God today. We are blessing the Lord for coming and being with us. The honor, the glory, the pride is placed on God entirely. So now that Michal has had this moment where she hates David for this, in this kind of a show he's put on, she's going to voice this to him. Verse 20, when David returned to bless his own household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, how the king of Israel distinguished himself today. He uncovered himself today in the eyes of his servants' maids, as one of the foolish ones shamelessly uncovers himself. So David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me ruler of the people of the Lord over Israel. Therefore I will celebrate before the Lord. I will be more lightly esteemed than this, and I will be humble in my own eyes. But with the maids of whom you have spoken, of them I will be distinguished. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. I like the NIV translation of that verse, because David says to Michal, I will become even more undignified than this in the presence of the Lord. You think this is undignified? I'll behave in whatever way is appropriate before the Lord, no matter what anybody else thinks. And those people respect me, because I was doing it for the Lord. And your ashamed father who's dead, because God put me ahead of him, has no pride left. And any claim that Michal would have had going forward, any children that could have taken the throne from David, were cut off. She was not able to have any pride in her own lineage from her ancestry, nor in her lineage going forward. She was cut off from pride. And David was covered with it, because his pride was not in himself, but in the power of God to do good for his people. David knew that the blessings that were in Obed-Edom the Gittite's house were now going to be on his. The blessings of the Lord were now going to sit upon him and his own house. So where does your pride come from? Does it come from letting other people determine what's dignified? Does it come from letting somebody tell you what's right and what's wrong, and when you're behaving right and when you're behaving inappropriately? Now, certainly, there are times when misconduct proves itself to everyone around, and you know, okay, I know when that's not right. And we deal with those times as they come up. But if you are acting in a way that the Lord prescribed before you to honor the Lord, then nobody can put you to shame. You need to know first of all, who God is, and know what he has done for you and what he has promised to do for you. David was a king from being a shepherd, not because he was unfamiliar with God, and not because God redirected things to make it happen for him, but because he knew who God was before he put that stone in the sling and killed Goliath. David knew God, and he knew from the moment that that Philistine giant fell, all the things that he did to make him king. He knew all of the enemies that God had conquered for him. He knew all of the lands that he had reclaimed for the people of Israel. He knew all of the victories God had given him. And because of that, David overcame the fear that came from dishonoring the Lord, and instead put honoring him first. Let's go back to that for a second. What happened at the beginning of our story? The start of this chapter was some guy offended God and died. Some guy dishonored the Lord, and he died in such a way that his name became famous because it was the place where he died for offending God. Perez Uzzah was known to that day. But on the other hand, if we are known for honoring God, then we will become known for the way that God would have us to conduct ourselves. We will become not necessarily respected by those people who look at our appearances, but honored by God for honoring him. And that's really what we need to do. We need to set God up in a special place in our hearts to make him holy, because that's what holy means, set apart. Give him honor, and no indignity that a human person can ever put on you could disgrace you, because God will honor those who honor him. I hope that this lesson has been encouraging for you today and can help us give a clear measurement to our actions as we go out into the world and try and determine whether we're doing things for God to honor him or whether we're doing things to please people. Indeed, there may be some people who are quite close to us who will disagree with the things that we need to do in order to honor God, but those things are not our concern. Our concern is honoring God no matter what. If you have not honored God by becoming one of his people and joining with him in baptism, we'd like to offer the opportunity to do so. Or if you need prayers of restoration or we can do anything else for you, we'd offer that you come forward